He was just a small dog soaking wet, motionless, floating in the icy lake like something already lost. But when I pulled him out, he breathed, and that breath. It didn't just save him, it led me to a truth buried deep in the forest. This wasn't an accident. He was trying to tell me something. If you think this is just another dog rescue story, think again. Like, subscribe and stay, because what this little golden revealed next will shake you. The sun had barely risen over Willow Bend, Oregon, a small pine-wrapped town that leaned against the edge of Cedar Lake like an old friend. The air was bitingly cold, the sky brushed in soft grays and frosted light. Thin mist hovered above the glassy surface of the lake, curling around the reeds like ghostly fingers. Winter had laid its claim, and the silence was thick, the kind of quiet that holds its breath between snowfalls. Clara Whitmore, 42, stepped carefully down the icy trail leading to the lakeside. She was tall with narrow shoulders and an angular frame that seemed carved from the same mountain stone as the cliffs beyond the lake. Her hair, once auburn, was now peppered with gray and always pulled back in a tight braid. Her clothes were practical thick woolen sweater-patch jeans and scuffed leather boots that had seen more winters than most people in town. Her gait was steady, but slow. Each footstep weighed down, not just by caution on the frozen ground, but by something heavier, grief. Clara had once been a trauma nurse stationed in overseas conflict zones, a woman built of steel nerves and steady hands. But everything changed 3 years ago. A drunk driver had run a red light and shattered her life in one violent moment. Her only son, Caleb, 10 years old, had been riding his bike home from school. Since then, Clara had retreated into a self-imposed exile. The lake walks were the only routine she kept, a quiet ritual where she could pretend for just a few minutes that the world had not gone wrong. She adjusted the wool scarf around her neck, the breath from her lips curling out in clouds. The lake, half frozen, shimmered like old silver beneath the morning light. She was about to turn back, thinking the cold had settled too deep into her bones for a long walk, when she saw something. At first glance it looked like driftwood or a discarded jacket maybe, but there was a shape to it, a softness in the way it bobbed near the reeds, half submerged, unmoving. Clara's body tensed. She squinted, stepping closer, heart already thudding against her ribs. The dark shape was small, no larger than a backpack soaked through and still, but as she closed the distance, a dread settled over her. The fur. She saw fur. "Oh no," she whispered. It was a dog. A puppy, really. Its golden coat had darkened to a muddy brown, soaked with icy water. Its head was turned sideways, one floppy ear pressed against the water's edge, eyes closed. The limbs hung limp. There was no collar, no movement, just stillness. Clara dropped her thermos. Her boots splashed into the shallow water without hesitation. The cold struck her calves like a slap, but she didn't feel it. Instinct took over. She waded through the freezing lake until she reached the little body, then knelt and lifted it gently. It was heavier than she expected, sodden with water, lifeless. She hoisted the puppy into her arms, stumbled back onto the shore, and laid it out on the hard ground. Clara's hands moved quickly, peeling off her gloves. She tilted the head, cleared the airway, and pinched the puppy's snout between her fingers. Her lips pressed to its muzzle, breathing air into tiny lungs that refused to move. "Come on." "Not yet," she murmured, voice trembling. "Come back." She began chest compressions, small and quick, counting under her breath. Her hands shook, half from the cold, half from the flood of memories. Field tents, frantic beeping machines, the silence that always came too soon. She breathed again, then again. Nothing. Then a twitch, so faint she thought she imagined it. One paw jerked just slightly, and then the puppy's chest expanded in a sickening, rattling gasp. It coughed, choked. Water streamed from its nose and mouth. "Oh my God," Clara whispered, clutching it close. "There you are. There you are." The puppy didn't open its eyes, but it whimpered a soft, broken sound that landed like a stone in Clara's chest. She pulled it into her coat, wrapping her body around it, using her own warmth as a shield. It was a golden retriever pup, maybe 6 months old, with soft golden fur matted with mud and debris. Its tail was a limp strand, and its ribs pressed sharp against Clara's arms. The eyes beneath those closed lids were sunken from hunger. He looked barely alive. "I've got you," she said into the fur. "I've got you now." Without thinking further, she stood and began the uphill walk back to her cabin. The climb was slow, her legs trembling not just from the cold, but from the weight of what she carried, this small, shivering creature, and a memory that refused to let her go. Her home stood at the edge of the woods, a modest log cabin with a stone chimney that always seemed to be exhaling smoke. The porch creaked as she stepped onto it, boots sloshing. Inside, warmth greeted her like a long-lost friend. She laid the puppy on a thick blanket by the fireplace, stripped off her wet coat, and tossed another log onto the flames. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows across the walls, lined with faded photos and forgotten books. She moved quickly, towels, heating pad, warm water in a syringe. She filled it with a mix of sugar and salt water, and gently pushed a few drops into the side of the pup's mouth. He swallowed barely. "Good boy," she whispered. "You're staying." She knelt and sat beside him, staring at the firelight, glinting on his damp fur. The name came to her without thinking, Sonny. Maybe it was the golden color of his coat under the grime, or the fragile warmth he'd stirred inside her. Or maybe it was hope, something she thought she'd buried with Caleb. As Sonny shivered once more and then stilled, Clara leaned back against the hearth, staring into the flames. She hadn't cried in 3 years, but now her eyes burned. She wasn't sure if it was for the boy she lost or for the tiny life she just helped bring back. But either way, the silence in the cabin didn't feel so empty anymore. The fire had burned low, leaving only a faint orange glow against the cabin walls as midnight approached. Clara sat on the floor, wrapped in a wool blanket, her back resting against the couch, eyes fixed on the small body curled beside the hearth. Sonny lay nestled in a thick towel, breathing shallow but steady. His damp golden fur had begun to dry, forming soft waves over his narrow back. The silence of the night pressed in gently, but for once it didn't feel oppressive. It felt watchful, warm, present. Clara hadn't moved for hours. She watched his chest rise and fall, like it held the rhythm of something more than breath, like it was counting the beats of something broken inside her, slowly stitching back together. Her legs had long gone numb, but she didn't care. The cabin, for all its rustic simplicity, had become a sanctuary once again. She reached for the old thermos she'd abandoned on the porch earlier, now lukewarm, and sipped slowly. In her lap lay the photograph she'd taken from the fireplace mantel, her son Caleb on his 10th birthday, grinning, with a missing front tooth, a homemade paper crown tilted sideways on his head. Her thumb brushed over the image as tears collected quietly at the corner of her eyes. She hadn't held this photo in months. Now it seemed too fragile to put down. A soft whimper broke the stillness. Clara looked up. Sonny stirred in his sleep pause, twitching as if running through dreams. His nose flared, a low sound escaped his throat, half growl, half cry. She leaned in and gently placed a hand on his back. "You're safe," she whispered. "It's over now." But deep down, she knew that wasn't fully true. For either of them. She stayed beside him until the clock struck 4 a.m., when her eyelids grew too heavy to resist. Clara stretched herself along the rug just beside Sonny, not touching him, but close enough to feel the heat between their bodies. She slept like that for the first time in years, without medication, without music, to drown out the silence, just the sound of a puppy breathing. The next morning came with a soft knock. Clara sat upright in an instant. The sun had barely begun its climb through the misty pines outside. The air in the cabin had grown cold again. Sonny, startled, raised his head with effort, letting out the faintest whimper. Clara soothed him with a stroke behind the ear and stood. Another knock, firmer. She opened the door to see a young girl standing in a puffed navy jacket, far too big for her frame, a backpack slung over one shoulder, and a duffel bag dragging in the snow behind her. Her blonde hair was tangled in a loose braid, her cheeks flushed with cold and defiance. She looked about 14, with long limbs that hadn't quite caught up to her height and a sharpness in her gray eyes that Clara recognized all too well. "Lily," Clara said, voice dry. "What are you doing here?" The girl adjusted the strap on her shoulder. "Mom dropped me off. Said you had room." Clara blinked. She didn't call? She said she texted. Lily replied, stepping inside without waiting for permission. "Guess you missed it." Clara closed the door, biting down on the groan rising in her throat. Her sister Julia always had a knack for dumping responsibility without warning. Lily hadn't visited in nearly 3 years, and the last time she did, she'd barely spoken 10 words to Clara. "You can sleep in the spare room," Clara said with a sigh. Take your boots off first. Lily peeled off her layers, revealing skinny jeans and a faded t-shirt with a band logo Clara didn't recognize. Her arms were pale, covered in faint scratches that Clara's nurse's eyes immediately clocked but didn't mention. Instead, she followed Lily's gaze as it drifted to the fire and to Sonny. The girl's lips parted. Is that your dog? No, Clara said. He's not. I just found him. Yesterday, in the lake. Lily dropped her bags and crouched low. He's really small. Is he okay? Barely. He's hanging on, though. Lily reached out slowly, letting Sonny sniff her fingers. The puppy's tail twitched just once. Clara felt something shift in the air, something delicate and uncertain. He's kinda perfect, Lily, whispered sitting cross-legged on the floor beside him. What's his name? Sonny Clara said after a pause. It just felt right. Lily nodded as if it made sense. For the next hour she sat there without saying another word, occasionally brushing a hand down Sonny's back. Clara watched from the kitchen, sipping coffee and trying to understand what was happening, this sudden collision of solitude, grief, and something that felt almost like healing. Later that morning, Lily helped prepare a bowl of warm broth. Clara showed her how to feed Sonny in small drops. They sat together by the hearth, watching him lap the liquid in slow, cautious sips. So, did you name me after someone? Lily asked suddenly. Clara blinked. What you always told me, names matter, stories behind them. I just wondered if mine came with a story. Clara looked down at her mug. I named you Lily because it was the first flower that bloomed the spring after Caleb was born. He loved them. Said they looked like trumpets. Lily looked down at her hands. I never knew that. I don't think anyone else does, Clara said softly. They didn't say anything for a long time after that. But the silence, once cold and distant, now felt like a bridge. By evening, Sonny was able to lift his head without help. His eyes, once sunken and dull, began to find shapes in the room. When Clara whispered his name, his ears twitched. When Lily reached out a hand, he nudged it weakly. And for Clara, for the first time in years, the house didn't feel haunted. It felt full. The winter sun hung low in the sky, casting long golden bars across the floorboards of Clara's cabin. It was late afternoon, the kind of cold that crept beneath coats and settled in bones. The fire burned steadily in the hearth, its warmth radiating across the small living space where Sonny now lay, nestled in a soft fleece blanket by the window. He had grown stronger over the past 2 days, his eyes more alert, his ears beginning to perk when someone entered the room. Clara moved quietly around the kitchen, spooning broth into a ceramic bowl. She still wore her practical clothing, dark jeans, thick flannel shirt, hair tied back, but there was a softness in her shoulders, now a gentler set to her jaw. She watched as Lily curled on the rug with a sketch pad in her lap, glanced over at Sonny between pencil strokes. Lily Grace, despite her guarded nature, had started to blossom in small, unexpected ways. She wore mismatched socks and oversized sweaters that belonged to someone older, but they somehow suited her tall, willowy figure. Her eyes, a pale gray like storm-washed sky, held a quiet hunger for connection. Clara had noticed how she bit her lip when unsure of something, or how she lingered near Sonny when she thought no one was watching. The girl was broken, yes, but not beyond repair. You're drawing again, Clara said gently, handing her a mug of cocoa. Just shapes, Lily replied, not looking up. Helps me think. Clara nodded and sat beside her. Sonny stirred slightly, shifting one paw outward. Lily looked over and smiled. He follows me with his eyes, she whispered, even when I'm not close. He's watching you, Clara said. Dogs remember who's kind. There was a pause. Then Lily added, Mom says people don't remember that stuff. That kindness doesn't count for much anymore. Clara didn't answer right away. She stared into the fire, the flames licking the old logs. Your mom's had it rough, Clara finally said. People deal with pain in all kinds of ways. Doesn't always mean they're right. They sat in quiet after that, the fire crackling softly, Sonny breathing in slow rhythm. Outside, the sky turned violet, bruised and beautiful, with streaks of orange melting into pine-shadowed hills. That night, Clara prepared a bed for Lily in the spare room, an old space filled with shelves of forgotten books, a woolen quilt, and a window that looked out toward the woods. Lily accepted the room without protest, but before disappearing behind the door, she paused. Do you think he has dreams? She asked, jerking her chin toward Sonny. All living things do, Clara replied, even the ones who don't speak them out loud. Later, when the house fell into the hush of midnight, the truth of Clara's words would echo with unexpected force. She had just drifted into sleep on the couch near the hearth, wrapped in a blanket and lulled by the low flicker of embers, when the silence split open. A sharp, strangled yelp cut through the air. Clara bolted upright. Sonny was on his side legs, twitching violently, mouth open in a silent cry. His whole body trembled as if locked in a battle against something only he could see. Clara rushed to him, kneeling on the rug. "Sonny, it's okay. You're safe, baby." But the puppy didn't wake. Another sound escaped him, a drawn-out whimper, so filled with panic that it raised goosebumps on Clara's arms. She placed her hands gently on his sides, trying to steady his movements, when suddenly his eyes flew open wide with fear. He gasped, then barked a single broken bark before attempting to scramble backward, hitting the leg of the couch. "Hey, Clara," whispered her voice low and calming. "It's me. You're okay." He blinked rapidly, pupils dilated, nostrils flaring as he sniffed the air frantically. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the panic in his body drained, leaving him limp in her arms. His heartbeat was still rapid under her fingers, but his breathing slowed. Footsteps approached. Lily peeked out from the hallway, hair tousled from sleep. What happened? Clara motioned for her to come closer. Lily sat down beside Sonny, reaching out a careful hand. He leaned into it, shivering. He had a nightmare, Clara said. A bad one. Lily's brows furrowed. About what, I don't know. But something's still in him. Something that didn't start at the lake. Lily stayed silent, stroking the soft fur behind Sonny's ear. The fire had burned low, leaving only red coals and shadows dancing on the walls. Outside, wind moaned through the tall trees like an ancient voice whispering things they didn't want to hear. And then, Sonny did something strange. He turned his head slowly toward the back window, the one that faced the tree line. His ears twitched, his nose lifted, and he let out a low, breathy growl. Clara followed his gaze. Darkness clung to the forest like a second skin. Nothing moved, no wind, no snow. But Sonny saw something, or smelled it. Lily leaned closer. What is it? Clara shook her head. Maybe a fox or a deer, but the hairs on her arms stood on end. Sonny had gone, still his body, a statue of attention. Then, as if something clicked, he whimpered again, this time, not in fear, but as if calling out. A long, keening sound filled the room. It sounded like mourning, or memory. Clara didn't sleep after that. Neither did Lily. They laid out blankets on the floor beside Sonny and watched the fire together, saying little. Outside, the trees swayed slightly as if stirred by something unseen. By morning, the dog was calmer but distant. He ate little and moved less. His eyes flicked toward the woods repeatedly as if waiting, and Clara began to wonder if Sonny had led her out of that frozen lake for a reason beyond survival. The morning air was brittle with cold sunlight glinting off the snow like shattered glass. Willow Bend lay hushed beneath a thin crust of white pine branches drooping under the weight of last night's frost. Clara adjusted her knit hat as she stepped off the cabin porch, boot soles crunching against the icy path. Sonny walked beside her slower than a healthy pup, but determined, his nose, low ears twitching at every breeze that passed through the trees. Behind them, Lily zipped up her oversized jacket and followed with a thermos in one hand and a sketchbook tucked under her arm. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, a few strands of blonde hair peeking from under her beanie. Though she said nothing, her eyes were sharp, scanning the snow, like someone trying to read a language she'd just started to understand. Clara had not intended to go far. It was supposed to be just a short walk, fresh air maybe, a little movement for Sonny to strengthen his legs. But the moment they reached the edge of the woods, he paused, turned his head, and veered left. Not randomly, not as if sniffing aimlessly. It was intentional, purposeful, and silent. "I think he's leading us somewhere," Lily said, breaking the quiet. Clara nodded but said nothing. Her heart beat faster, and she didn't know why. They followed the small dog into the trees where the snow thinned beneath the canopy. The pines stood tall and close together, their dark trunks like sentinels against the white. Sonny's paws left shallow imprints, each one trailing ahead like breadcrumbs. His tail flicked occasionally, but mostly he moved with focused intensity, stopping now and then to sniff the base of trees or patches of frozen grass. Lily stepped lightly, eyes darting back and forth. "You don't think..." Someone else dumped him here, do you? Clara exhaled a fog of breath. I don't know. But I don't think he was alone. They walked deeper into the forest. After about 15 minutes, Clara noticed something unusual. Near a cluster of low shrubs, Sonny stopped and began to circle. His nose hovered above the snow, and he let out a low whine. Clara stepped closer and squinted. There, etched in the white, smaller footprints. Delicate staggered like a smaller animal had been there recently. The size suggested another pup, maybe even younger than Sonny. Lily crouched, sketchpad forgotten now. These aren't his, she whispered. No, Clara agreed. They're too small, and the gait's wrong, limping. She had seen animal tracks many times during her years hiking and camping, but these weren't wild. These were careful, afraid, maybe injured. And they didn't wander. They led somewhere. Sonny sniffed forward, following the line of the prints until they disappeared under a clump of dense underbrush. The branches here had been disturbed, some broken. Clara pulled them aside carefully. Beyond the thicket was a shallow hollow, no bigger than a bathtub, dug slightly into the earth and covered in scattered pine needles. In the center lay the remnants of an old blanket, tattered and frozen stiff. Beside it, a metal food bowl crusted with old kibble and a strip of shredded fabric, maybe from a collar. Lily inhaled sharply. Someone was keeping a dog here, or leaving one, Clara murmured. Sonny stepped into the hollow, lowered his nose, and gave a soft, familiar whimper, the same one he'd made the night before when staring out the window. He circled the space once, then lay down inside it, pressing his side to the frigid ground, as though trying to recall something that had been lost. Clara felt the chill creep up her spine, not from the cold, but from realization. He's been here before, she said. This isn't new to him. But it's empty now, Lily said. Whoever or whatever was here, they're gone. They stood in silence. Clara looked around, no other footprints leading away. Just those leading in, then stopping. We should head back, she said finally. It's too cold to stay long. They turned to leave, but Sonny remained still, refusing to rise. Lily knelt beside him, coaxing gently. He looked up, ears twitching, but didn't move. Clara reached down and lifted him in her arms. He was heavier than he looked, his muscles still weak, his ribs too prominent. As she held him, she could feel his chest rising faster than normal, like he was breathing memories. Back at the cabin, the air was warm and thick with the scent of pine logs and rosemary bread Clara had started that morning. She laid Sonny near the fire again, but this time he didn't curl up immediately. He sat staring at the door, unmoving. Lily retreated to the kitchen and returned with a steaming mug for Clara. He's looking for something, she said. Or someone. I think you're right, Clara replied, rubbing her temples. The knock on the door that came just before dusk was unexpected. It was Sarah Bennett, a woman in her early 60s who ran the local general store. She was tall, with elegant posture, and silver-streaked brown hair pinned into a tidy bun. Always dressed in earth-tone wool coats and gloves that matched, Sarah had a sharp gaze and a voice like steady wind through trees. Years ago, her son had vanished during a camping trip never found. Since then, she'd become a woman who watched others closely, spoke little, and trusted even less. Sorry to intrude, Sarah said, stepping inside when Clara opened the door. I heard you found a dog. Word gets around quick here. Clara motioned to Sonny. Yes. Pulled him from the lake 3 days ago. He's recovering, but... Sarah stepped closer and knelt to look at him. Sonny didn't pull away. Instead, he sniffed her gloves once, then looked up, tail thumping once. I've seen that look, Sarah said. My neighbor Jacob Redley, he's been missing one of his pups. He raises Goldens. Sold a few last season. One buyer backed out, so he let the pair roam until he could rehome them. Then they vanished. Clara's heart skipped. There might be another, Sarah nodded. If it's the same litter, they were inseparable. As Sarah spoke, Lily's eyes widened. That's who Sonny's been looking for. They all turned to the pup, who now stared at the door again, ears perked. The snow had stopped falling that afternoon, leaving behind a fresh white quilt draped over the trees and rooftops of Willow Bend. Clara stood outside the cabin, arms crossed against the cold, watching the last light of day retreat behind the pines. Her breath came out in slow puffs. The trail they had followed with Sonny earlier now lay buried under new powder, as if the forest wanted to hide the truth they'd uncovered. Inside, Lily had set up a circle of candles on the hearth surrounding Sonny like a makeshift campfire. The soft golden glow flickered across the pup's fur as he slept peacefully, his small chest rising and falling in rhythm. Lily sat nearby, her sketchbook open, but forgotten on her lap, her gaze fixed on the flames. Clara came in, shook the snow from her boots, and lowered herself onto the rug beside her. The air inside the cabin was thick with rosemary and cedar. Clara had thrown a few sprigs into the fire earlier, a habit she'd picked up from her grandmother, who believed it kept away sorrow. Whether it worked or not, she didn't know. But tonight she needed something more than silence. "Did you ever feel invisible?" Lily asked suddenly, her voice so soft it barely registered above the crackling logs. Clara turned her head, studying her niece's profile. The girl's features were sharp, but not hardened. There was still softness around the cheeks, a trace of the child she once was. "Sometimes," Clara said, "especially after Caleb died. I felt like I could scream, and no one would hear me." Lily nodded, still staring at the fire. "After the divorce, I felt like a box that got left behind in a move. You know, like, too heavy to carry, too useless to unpack." Clara said nothing. The fire popped, sending up a small shower of sparks. "My dad moved out. First," Lily continued. "Then Mom started working night shifts. I'd come home and sit alone in the dark sometimes until morning. She said I was old enough to manage, but I wasn't." "Not really?" Clara looked down at Sonny. The little golden dog was curled tight into a ball, his nose tucked under his paw, one ear flicking occasionally. "No one's really old enough for that," she said. Lily's voice wavered. "I didn't tell anyone, not teachers, not friends. They wouldn't have understood. I stopped drawing for a long time. Thought it was stupid. Like, what's the point of making something pretty when the world's so ugly?" Clara leaned back against the couch. Her eyes had grown glassy, but she blinked the moisture away. "I used to think like that, too." "You did? I was a nurse," Clara said. "I spent years patching up bodies that were torn apart. Gunshot wounds, burn victims, children. Sometimes I'd go home and sit in the dark, too, pretend none of it was real. But then I had Caleb, and suddenly everything mattered again." Lily turned toward her. "What happened to him?" Clara hesitated. Her throat closed for a moment. She looked toward the fireplace, then back at Lily. "He was 10, riding his bike home from school. A drunk driver ran a red light. He died on impact. I wasn't there. The silence that followed was heavy, but not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people standing on the same cliff edge, finally seeing each other." Lily whispered, "I'm sorry." Clara nodded. "So am I." They sat like that for a long time. Outside, the moon rose behind the trees, casting blue light across the clearing. Sonny shifted, let out a soft snore, and then, without waking, scooted closer to Clara's leg. Lily reached out and ran her fingers through the dog's fur. "He picked you," she said. "I think he knew you needed him." Clara smiled faintly. "Maybe I did." A log collapsed in the fire, sending a gust of warmth over them. "You know," Lily added after a while, "I think I needed him too." Clara studied her for a long moment. The girl's face, usually so guarded, was open now, raw, but genuine. Something had broken through, not in a way that hurt, but in a way that allowed light in. "Well," Clara said softly, "then it looks like we're all saving each other." They didn't speak again that night. Instead, Clara pulled a blanket over Lily's shoulders and another around Sonny. She turned down the lights but left the candles burning low, letting their glow paint soft patterns across the walls. Later, after Lily had gone to bed and the fire was only embers, Clara sat alone with Sonny in her lap. She stroked his head gently and looked toward the window where the trees whispered in the wind. In that moment, she didn't feel like a ghost anymore. It began just after dawn, with Sonny pacing by the door. Clara had noticed the restlessness even before her first sip of coffee. The little golden dog had been circling the entryway since Lily came down the stairs, his body taut with quiet urgency. His nose twitched in the cold drafts slipping through the frame, and his ears were perked, listening to a sound that neither Clara nor Lily could hear. Lily, now more animated in the mornings than she had been in months, crouched beside him. "You want to go out, huh? You smell something." Sonny didn't wag his tail. This wasn't excitement. It was determination. Clara zipped up her coat and grabbed her boots. "Let's follow him," she said. "But we go slow. The snow's deeper today." They made their way into the forest, the sun still climbing behind the mountain ridge. Pine trees lined their path like pillars, their snow-draped branches drooping low. The trail from earlier had been dusted over by fresh snowfall, but Sonny found his rhythm quickly leading them, with steady paws and his nose glued to the ground. After about 20 minutes of walking, Clara called out, "This is farther than before." Sonny didn't slow. His limbs, still fragile days ago, now moved with purpose even through snow that nearly brushed his belly. They passed familiar trees and the hollow they'd found days earlier. But this time, Sonny didn't stop. He pressed onward into thicker woods. Eventually, they reached an area Clara didn't recognize. The trees grew tighter together here, and thick underbrush had to be parted with gloved hands. Lily walked behind her, a scarf wrapped around her mouth, eyes alert and unafraid. Her sketchbook was strapped to her backpack, though she hadn't touched it since the night before. Then Sonny stopped. He stood near a cluster of boulders dusted with snow and moss. His head lifted ears forward and his breath came out in small huffs. Clara saw the faintest line of paw prints in the snow, smaller than his, and less defined, like the weight behind them had been lighter, or weaker. Sonny stepped toward a dark crevice between two rocks. It was low, barely high enough for a dog to crawl into, but as he approached, he let out a sound Clara had not heard from him before, a soft whimpering whine filled with something between fear and hope. "Sonny," Lily said, crouching beside him. "What is it?" And then the second sound came, a faint broken yelp, muffled and trembling. Clara's heart leapt. She dropped to her knees and cleared the snow from the edges of the rocks. Lily grabbed her flashlight from her coat pocket and handed it over. Clara leaned forward, shining the light into the hollow. Curled in the back, nearly invisible beneath a mess of leaves and ice, was a small pup, golden with reddish-tinted fur. Thinner than Sonny had been ribs pressing sharply against his skin. The dog trembled, his head twitching weakly as the light struck his eyes. He didn't move toward them. He didn't growl. He simply lay there exhausted, as if the last of his strength had drained days ago. Then Sonny barked once, a single sharp cry, and leapt into the hollow. He didn't stop to sniff or hesitate. He pressed his body against the other pup curling around him, nudging his nose under the weaker dog's head. The reddish pup let out a soft whine, then buried his face into Sonny's neck. Clara couldn't breathe. "They know each other," Lily whispered. Clara nodded, blinking rapidly. "That's not just any dog, that's his brother." They took their time clearing the entrance and gently coaxing the injured pup out. Clara removed her coat and wrapped it around him, pressing him against her chest. He was colder than Sonny had been when she found him, but his heart was still beating fast, fluttery but there. On the way back, Sonny walked beside Clara, never once letting the bundle out of his sight. At one point, he nudged Clara's leg, then stepped slightly ahead, as if clearing the path. Once inside the cabin, they laid the new pup near the fire on a thick towel. Clara set a pot of water to warm, while Lily used a syringe to feed tiny drops of broth into his mouth. The pup's eyes opened only briefly, 2 slivers of gold clouded by exhaustion, but he swallowed. And then again. Sonny curled up beside him, immediately pressing his warmth into his brother's side. Lily reached out and gently touched the tip of the new pup's ear. What should we call him? Clara was still kneeling, her hand on Sonny's back. She looked at the reddish tint in the pup's fur, how it caught the firelight like the end of a matchstick. "Ember," she said softly, "like the last bit of flame that refuses to go out." Lily smiled faintly. "It fits." Clara glanced down at Sonny. He rested with his head on Ember's shoulder, their bodies rising and falling together. "He found him," Clara whispered. Through snow and silence, that little dog found his brother. Later, after Ember had fallen into a deep sleep, Clara stepped outside for air. The sky had shifted into pale gray snow, threatening again. She stared at the trees, listening. Nothing moved, but she knew something had changed. She wasn't just helping these dogs survive anymore. They were guiding her too, through grief, through silence, through years of solitude she hadn't even realized she'd been living in. And now she was no longer walking through the forest alone. The snow outside had grown thinner, retreating slowly as February crept toward spring. Though the air still bit in the mornings, the icicles hanging from the eaves of Clara's cabin were beginning to drip. The change was subtle, but in Willowbend, even the smallest shifts carried meaning. Inside, warmth had returned, not just in temperature, but in presence. The fireplace was no longer just for heat. It was a gathering place. 2 small bodies, golden and flame-tipped, curled beside each other in a tangle of fur and trust. Sunny and Ember, now side by side, as if they had never been apart, slept with soft sighs and occasional sleepy whimpers, safe at last. Clara stood at the window mug in hand, watching the trees sway lightly in the morning breeze. She had begun writing again short entries in an old leather-bound journal that Caleb had once given her for her birthday. It had remained blank since his death pages, too heavy with silence to fill. But now, each day a line or two found its way in. Sunny led me to Ember, but they're also leading me back to myself. Lily sat at the table behind her, hunched over the sketch pad that had hardly left her side. The stiffness in her posture had softened over the past week. She now laughed softly but with sincerity. That morning, Clara had caught her giggling as Sunny tripped over his own feet chasing Ember in the living room. She didn't interrupt. She just watched heart tight and full. The pups had begun to play again. Not the wild energy of healthy dogs, but the cautious, clumsy movements of two brothers relearning safety. Ember, though smaller and slower, had a boldness to him. He was curious and often the first to investigate a sound or a new object tail raised like a banner, even when his legs wobbled. His reddish fur was patchy in places where old wounds had healed, and his right ear folded slightly inward, a permanent mark from some past injury. Still, his eyes sparkled with defiance and life. Clara had taken Ember to the local vet, Dr. Helen Sanders, a woman in her early 50s with a commanding but gentle presence. Helen was tall with dark, tightly coiled hair, streaked with gray, and always wore simple jeans and a flannel shirt under her white coat. She had worked with rescue dogs for decades and had a voice that could quiet a kennel with a whisper. Helen examined Ember with careful hands and a look of awe. "They both should have died," she said quietly, brushing a finger over the old scar under Ember's front leg. But somehow, they didn't. She prescribed antibiotics, vitamins, and a soft diet, and made Clara promise to bring them back weekly. "They're not just surviving," she added. "They're choosing to live. That matters." That afternoon, Clara wrote in her journal, "Helen's right." Something inside these dogs refused to quit, and somehow, that strength is spilling into me. In the evenings, the cabin grew quiet. Clara would sit near the fire, reading or journaling, while Lily lay belly down on the rug, sketching Sunny and Ember curled beside her. The dogs had claimed a favorite spot under the front window, where they could see the edge of the woods. Occasionally, Sunny would lift his head ears, twitching toward the forest as if listening. But he didn't whimper anymore. Ember would follow his brother's gaze, but never reacted. Whatever had kept them apart was gone now. The past had receded. One night, as snow began to fall again, Lily looked up from her drawings. "Can I stay here longer?" Clara blinked, surprised. "You mean, not go back after the break?" Lily hesitated. "I know Mom won't like it, but she's barely around anyway. And here, I don't feel forgotten." Clara felt something crack and then gently settle in her chest. She reached out, placing her hand over Lily's. "You're not forgotten. Not here. Not ever." Lily's eyes filled, but she nodded, squeezing Clara's hand back. The next morning, Clara emailed her sister. It was a simple note, respectful but firm. She explained that Lily was doing better here, that she was attending online classes Clara would help manage, and that for now, it was best for everyone that she stayed. Julia didn't reply. Clara wasn't surprised. That evening, she made roasted vegetables and chicken broth for dinner. She set bowls down not just for her and Lily, but two smaller ones beside the fireplace. Sunny barked once in appreciation. Ember licked the bowl clean before nudging it into the wall with a satisfied grunt. Later, Clara wrote, "It's been years since I cooked for anyone but myself, and yet now dinner feels like ritual, like love quietly served in warm bowls." Spring was still weeks away, but already the shadows in the cabin had grown less sharp. The days were longer, the silences were lighter. There were no grand declarations or sudden transformations, but there was laughter, there was play, there was healing. And beneath it all, a bond built not through words, but through shared survival. The snow had finally begun to melt. Patches of earth peeked out from beneath the white, revealing pine needles, damp moss, and the soft green hints of approaching spring. For the first time in weeks, the sunlight in Willow Bend felt warm rather than decorative. Clara stood in her backyard adjusting the old wooden picnic table that had sat unused for years. Today she intended to change that. She wore a light jacket over a flannel shirt sleeves, rolled her braid tucked into a wool cap. Her movements were steady, but unhurried, filled with purpose. On the edge of the yard, two golden pups chased each other in wide circles, Sunny with his floppy ears bouncing wildly, and Ember smaller, but quicker, darting in and out with bursts of playful energy. Their barks rang through the woods like bells. Lily sat on the steps of the porch watching them with an open grin. She wore a soft green hoodie charcoal leggings, and her sketchbook balanced against her knees. Though she hadn't drawn today, she hadn't stopped smiling either. She leaned back into the sunlight, eyes closed, soaking in the warmth. Clara called from the table. "Think you're ready to help me? Frost this cake." "Chef," Lily opened one eye. "Depends. Do I get to eat the frosting as payment?" "That's your only salary here," Clara replied, smirking. As Lily joined her at the table, Clara looked around. The yard had changed without her realizing it, no longer just the space behind a quiet woman's cabin, but a home filled with laughter, paw prints, and shared silence that meant comfort, not pain. A few of the neighbors had been invited, just two, both of whom had become quietly important. First to arrive was Sarah Bennett, the tall, elegant woman from the general store. Her brown hair swept neatly into a bun, as always, and a tray of homemade biscuits wrapped in a blue checkered cloth under one arm. "I figured two growing boys would need more than cake," she said, nodding towards Sunny and Ember. "They'll need baths after this," Clara chuckled, "but I'll take it." Sarah had become a steady presence since the rescue, occasionally dropping by with soup or extra dog food. She never stayed long, but she always asked about Lily. Clara suspected that in her own quiet way, Sarah saw something of herself in their story, a survivor who kept going without expecting much in return. The second guest was Joe Mallory, a retired forest ranger with weathered skin, a hunched back, and a thick mustache that hid most of his expressions. Joe lived alone in a cabin up the ridge and rarely spoke unless it mattered. But today, as he approached with a thermos of mulled cider, he had something to say. "Saw a truck pass through my stretch a few weeks back," he said, after pouring Clara a cup. "Old Ford, rusted red. I didn't think much of it until I saw what they tossed from the tailgate." Clara's hand froze around the cup. Joe's voice remained even. Two shapes hit the snow. They didn't stop, no tags, no hesitation. I figured I was too far to do anything. But now I'm thinking they were yours. Lily's expression tightened. "You saw them dump Sunny," and Ember Joe nodded. "Didn't know their names then, but I remember the sound. Broke my damn heart." There was a long silence. Clara glanced at the pups. They were now flopped against each other, under the cedar tree tongues, out fur muddy from the thawing earth. Sunny looked up at her briefly, eyes soft and steady. Lily spoke first. "So, are you going to report it?" Clara looked down at the cider, the golden ripples inside it glowing in the sun. "No," she said gently. "I'm not." Joe didn't argue, neither did Sarah. "I used to think justice meant chasing people down," Clara continued. "But some wrongs, they don't need punishment to be answered. They need love to be undone." She turned to Lily. "And we've already started undoing it." Later, as the small group gathered around the table, sharing warm cider and stories, Clara brought out two collars, simple leather bands she had stitched by hand. One read Sunny, the other Ember. She knelt beside them, fastening the collars gently. "You're home now," she whispered. "Forever." Sunny pressed his forehead into her shoulder, while Ember gave a soft sneeze that made everyone laugh. As dusk fell, the fire pit lit up the yard with golden light. Lily roasted marshmallows over the flames, her cheeks glowing, her laughter easy. Clara sat beside her with a journal on her lap pen resting across the page. She hadn't written anything yet, not because she had nothing to say, but because tonight words felt too small for what her heart held. The boys curled at their feet, breathing in sync. Clara looked up at the stars beginning to appear above the trees and whispered to the night, "Thank you. Not for the pain, not for the silence, but for what had grown in its place, a woman healing, a girl learning to hope, two dogs who had never stopped believing in someone to come back for." Sometimes the most broken hearts carry the strongest light, and sometimes healing doesn't come from fixing the past, but from building something new with those who choose to stay. Sunny and Ember weren't just rescued, they became the rescuers, reminding us that love can begin again in the quietest moments. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to believe in second chances. Comment below and tell us, have you ever been saved by someone you didn't expect? And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next story that could change everything.